Hello, I'm Dina Feingold. I'm the rabbi at Beth Hillel Temple in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And I come on behalf of a group of us who planned this program to welcome you to Kenosha's annual Interfaith Holocaust Commemoration, hosted by the Kenosha Public Museum. Each year in Kenosha for the past 40 years, interfaith leaders and Holocaust educators have come together to offer a program of remembrance and education for the community during the National Days of the Remembrance of the Holocaust, as designated by the United States Holocaust Council. This year's event has been pre-recorded and is released to the public on the evening of April 27, which is the beginning of Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Commemoration Day, on the Jewish calendar. The theme of this year's program is Memory, Dignity, and Justice. Please join us for the next 45 minutes or so for prayers, a candlelighting ceremony with readings on the theme by students at Indian Trail High School, music by choir and orchestra from Indian Trail, and our featured speaker, Holocaust survivor Eva Zaret of Milwaukee. In offering this program, we are cognizant of the fact that genocides are tragically still taking place today. Every day on the news, we witness the displacement of groups of people, mass killings, and persecutions of minority groups across the globe, even in some of the very same places where the Holocaust happened decades ago on a much larger scale. 6 million Jews were designated for extermination in World War II. They, along with millions of others, perished at the hands of the Nazis and their collaborators. Tonight, we personalize and lift up a few aspects of this tragedy to help those who watch to become upstanders and not bystanders against hate, oppression, and cruelty. We offer special thanks to religious leaders from Congregations United to Serve Humanity, the staff at the Kenosha Public Museum, and Jason Rimkus, video technician and editor, for making this program possible. And now we begin. We begin with silence, the silence of death, the silence after destruction. There are times when songs falter, when darkness fills life, when martyrdom becomes a constellation of faith against the unrelieved black of space about us. There are no words to reach beyond the edge of night, no messenger to tell the full tale. There is only silence. The silence of Job, the silence of the 6 million, the silence of memory. Let us remember them as we link our silences.
Hello, this is Dr. Judith Faye Podlipnik, and I'm a Holocaust historian. This year's theme, as prescribed by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., is memory, dignity, and justice. Each of these subjects are imperative to the study, explanation, and dissemination of the Holocaust. They are quite expansive in their materials and meanings, yet hold principal intricacies and are most certainly entwined in creating the overall pictures of the lessons of the Shoah, which specifically refer to the murder of 6+ million Jews during World War II. Rather than attempting to delve into a complete examination of each, I would like to share that which I find of greatest significance in the world today. Memory. The memories, testimonies, diaries, letters, and more recently dialogue and lectures imparted by those who survived the Nazi genocide comprise some of the most crucial sources for we scholars who study and teach the Shoah. The current presence and communications of the survivors, make the horrific details of that period more tangible and real. Yet sadly, this generation is disappearing. Their voices are dwindling, and the threat of it all being forgotten is on the horizon. However, as the next generation, not just of scholars, relatives, Jews, but of all people, all adults, teachers, parents, friends, teenagers, all human beings, we must do everything that we can to ensure that their experiences, messages, and warnings live forever. We must learn from their memories so as to have informed responses to similar triggers, warnings, and treatments today and the future. Dignity. Article 1 of the Declaration of Human Rights, proclaimed by the United Nations in 1948, was a milestone, for as the first time fundamental human rights were to be universally protected. It reads, "All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood." Through documents, journals, and memories, we are sadly cognizant of the inhumane treatment that the Jews experienced at the hands of the Nazis and their collaborators. Hannah Levy Weiss, a teacher from Yugoslavia, interned in the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, wrote, "I would love to feel something pleasant, aesthetic, to awaken nobler, tender feelings, dignified emotions. It is hard. I press my imagination, but nothing comes. Our existence has something cruel, beastly about it. Everything human is reduced to zero. We have not died, but we are dead." Most victims and survivors maintain their dignity not by surrendering to the intentional dehumanization. Rather, they chose to live, be human, and exhibited humanity and unity. They sang songs under their breath. They prayed, smiled at one another, held hands, lifted one another when one fell to the ground. Although they were treated as animals, they defied their perpetrators by maintaining their humanness, their brotherhood, their state of being worthy, their dignity. Justice. Justice following the Holocaust had many faces. That of vengeance against the victims, vengeance by the victims against the perpetrators, post-war trials and execution of Nazis and their collaborators, the reacquisition of stolen property, financial recompense. Yet perhaps the most poignant element was the restitution of their humanity and the ability to live again. The survivors of the Holocaust endured that which no one could have ever conceived. The Jews were to be eradicated from this earth. Their existence was to be completely erased. A Jew could not escape from this sentence. No religious conversion, no bargaining, bartering, etc., could save Jews from the original plan of the final solution. Yet with the defeat of the Axis, the liberation of the camps, and the restoration of peace, Jews received their prize, their justice in being able to live freely, with dignity, and to spread their memories so as to teach the world about the horrors of discrimination, racism, and hatred. The United Nations issued the following statement for Yom HaShoah 2022. Quote, "Holocaust commemoration and education is a global imperative in the third decade of the 21st century. Safeguarding the historical record, remembering the victims, challenging the distortion of history often expressed in contemporary anti-Semitism are critical aspects of claiming justice after atrocity crimes." Thus, in memory of the 6 million plus Jews who perished during the Holocaust, let us posthumously grant them dignity and deliver them well-deserved justice of promising them that we shall never forget. And we shall teach our children and our children's children about the lessons and the legacies of the Holocaust. Thank you.
Memory, Herbert J. At the last end of my time in the camp, when I was too sick, I was told not to go on sick call. And I asked why, and they said, "You don't come back from sick call." And I was pretty sick. So when the Germans made their inspections after everybody had gone out to work and found me there, they started beating me. I crawled out of the barricades and crawled underneath. Underneath the barricades, it was all muck and slime and human feces and everywhere. And I got down there. They tried to chase me out from underneath there. That night, when I crawled out, some of the fellows in my outfits who were still alive brought me some soup. The next morning, they piled me with the dead bodies, and I stayed with the dead bodies until nighttime. They brought me back again, at nighttime. Because they would bury from one end the oldest bodies first, they couldn't catch up with the amounts. They were cremated, so put me with the fresh bodies.
When we reached Auschwitz, there was no one at the station. It was dark and quiet. In my compartment, there was women and children and a young dancer from Paris. She was an unusually beautiful woman, very pleasant and courteous. Since it was very hot, we all wore bathing suits. The dancer was wearing a two-piece suit. We were all tired from the long trip, so we dozed as we waited to leave the cars. We were awakened by boots with spurs and the barking of dogs. We started to get dressed and to get our luggage together, as is usually done when a train pulls into the station. All of a sudden, the door of our compartment opened with a loud noise, and a sleepy SS man told us to strip naked and to come out of the station, leaving all our clothes and baggage behind in the cars. "What do you mean? You want us to go out to the station naked?" we asked, not believing what we heard. When we stood there, undecided, he started hitting us with the rifle butt. "Schneeler, Schneeler," they shouted for all sides. We started to undress. Later, the SS men burst into the compartments with dogs and chased us out. We were not allowed to stand for a minute. We had to go forward completely naked. The dancer, still in her bathing suit, was walking next to me. She was the only one who did not get undressed. The SS man, apparently the commandant of the guards, approached her. "Beautiful girl, take off your suit," he asked quietly, coming closer and closer to her. Then, all of a sudden, with a rapid movement, she grabbed the pistol out of her holster and shot straight at him. After that, she took 3 steps backwards and shot the SS men who were running all over the place. She saved the last bullet for herself. She fell to the ground.
Justice. From attorneys Cordell Hull, Henry Stimson, and James Forrestal at the Nuremberg trials. The criminality with which the Nazi leaders and groups are charged does not consist of scattered individual outrages, such as may occur in any war, but represents the results of a purposeful and systematic pattern created by them to the end of achieving world domination. The objective in the prosecution of Nazi war crimes should not be only to punish the individual criminals, but also to expose and condemn the criminal purpose behind each individual outrage. The proceedings will be judicial rather than political. It will rest securely upon traditionally established legal concepts. Not only will the guilty of this generation be brought to justice according to due process of law, but in addition, the conduct of the Axis will have been solemnly condemned by international adjudication of guilt that cannot fail to impress generations to come.
My name is Susan Patterson Sumwalt, and I am the pastor of First United Methodist Church, and it is truly my privilege to introduce our speaker this evening. Eva Zaret, born Eva Klein, was born in Budapest, Hungary in 1936. She lived through the Holocaust in the Budapest ghetto. After the war, she regained her health in the Carpathian Mountains with her family. On a trip into the city, her family was caught in the outbreak of the Hungarian Revolution, which she and her husband at that time escaped on foot, eventually coming to the United States. Let's hear now her story.
We're here because of the kindness and the courage of Eva Zaret.
Thank you.
I had the honor of going to Eva's house. I usually get to speak to the survivors for an hour one-on-one before we do these, so I get to get a sense of their story. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I probably saw 10 million words at your house the other day. There's so many pictures because Eva says that's all we have left. It's not quite all we have left, but they help a lot. Paint a picture for us of your family when you were a little girl before the war started. Tell us about your parents and your grandma and where you lived.
Well, first of all, thank you for coming and thank you for doing this. I wish that we would learn from history, but it doesn't look like we do. It's not easy for me to come and speak because I go through my whole childhood, which was very painful. We had a wonderful middle-class family. My grandmother lived with us till the things were happening slowly. I was 7 years old, so my story, I don't go and elaborate on what really happened during World War II. I tell the children that I go to school to talk to and to you my story, what I saw as a child. So I had a wonderful, happy childhood till things were coming on horribly.
By the way, you said your grandmother, what was grandma's name?
My grandma's name was Rose Reisel. My granddaughter here is named after her. My father, Jacob, who was murdered after working in a hard labor camp for a year and a half. 2,000 Jewish men were coming home to the Hungarian border from Yugoslavia, working for the Germans, and they had to dig their grave and shut into it. That's how he died, and I lost my father's whole family. My aunt was 7 months pregnant, died in Auschwitz. As she tumbled out of the train, the Nazi stuck the bayonet in her stomach. My father's brother was very wealthy, so they were living in a villa during the horrible times, and there were he and his wife and the daughter were shot into the Danube.
You said something the other day that stuck with me, haunted me. You said that Danube is my family's cemetery.
The Danube, because many of my family, cousins and uncles and aunts were shot into it. Out of 650,000 Jews in Hungary, and it was like a year and a half that it all happened. It's kind of towards the end of the war, that all the Jews of Hungary were pushed out into concentration camp or shot into the Danube. That two cousins of mine who were hiding in a convent, the nuns took them to the movie, and a friend of theirs, a school friend of theirs, recognized them and they grabbed them. They're not Jewish, they're falsely with the convent. Let's grab them, and they're shot into the Danube. So that's part of the cemetery.
So life was going on pretty well, and you said you first felt the pain of what was coming at school. What did children call you, and what happened?
Christ killer. My friends, whom I went to school with, I was in first grade. All of a sudden, they hated me. I didn't know why. They called me Christ killer. I went home crying, and I asked my mother, did I kill anybody? Did you kill anybody? I didn't even know who was Christ. That's how it started. I felt hatred. I felt terrible hatred from our neighbors, our friends, my girlfriends. In school, I didn't understand. Did I do something? I didn't do anything.
So this happened, and at what point did your life change in terms of where you lived and how you lived?
Systematically, we had to go and move into different housing. First, we moved in with my grandparents, my father's parents. It was a Swedish house, and then we moved into a Red Cross house with other families, and slowly was more people were taken to transport. We didn't know where they're taking them because it was all kinds of false thing. They're going to sew for the Germans, they have to go to the brick factory one day, and my mother had to go because that was the age that they're calling them. And you couldn't escape because people knew you in the housing, so you couldn't escape to run away somewhere. So after my mother left to sew for the Germans to this brick factory, I heard on the radio.
Your dad at this point had left?
My dad was taken to hard labor camp where he worked very hard under the ground for a year and a half.
What did they tell you when he left?
That he's going to work. They're going to work for the Germans. They're even in the beginning, they were able to send pictures of themselves working. But then we discovered, later how hard those people worked. And once they lost their strength, then they just murdered them, like my father. They sent 2,000 men, and they had to make their own grave and shut into it. He was 35 years old. I miss him to this day. I'm looking, because I didn't see where he was buried. Somewhere, maybe some sunflowers growing over him. I don't know.
And you have a picture of him that has thread woven into it. How come?
Because that thread, he once sent a postcard, which is in the Jewish Museum, and it said that we reached the Hungarian border and soon we're going to see each other. And he had a little snapshot of him, and he sewed it on the postcard. That was the last thing that I had from my father. But there is another picture before the war. The last time I saw him, I am in this beautiful boulevard of Heroes Square, and he's holding my hand. And that was the last time I saw him.
And that's in Budapest?
Budapest.
And you got to go back there with your family?
I went back with my children and grandchildren. Here is one. I took all of them back to show them of my wonderful city where I was born, and I am 5 generations from my father's side, and they loved Hungary. They loved living there. It's hard to, even for me to believe what happened, and I lived through it.
So your dad went to work in the Boer camp, and you were about to say there's an announcement on the radio. Your mom had been told she had to go work, and Mom did hard labor. She was clearing rubble, right?
Yeah, they were to get away from the house because the Nazis came and they just picked up people, kids, women, whoever were there, announcements, and they took them with trucks. But this time they said everybody has to come from this age to that age, go to sew for the Germans in the brick factory. Well, later on we found out that wasn't where they're going. They were taking them to the train station because the trains were going constantly to Auschwitz. The Hungarian Jews were the last of the Jews who ended up straight to the gas chamber and to the ovens. So the radio announced that whose husband is in Bor, where my father was, don't have to go. So I ran, Budapest is a big city. I ran out and I found my mother. And when she saw me, she started yelling at me. What are you doing here? She got scared. So it happened that was a nice policeman next to her and said, listen to your daughter, she's telling you the truth, get out of the line. I saved her life. I didn't know I'm going to do that. At age 7, I don't know if you remember anything from age 7, but because what I went through, such horrible things, it's those sticks in my memory.
And I asked you when we talked, how is it that you would have heard this announcement? And you said throughout this experience, the radio was always on in your house.
We always find news. We looked when the war gonna be over, because by then, you know, the Russians were very close to Budapest, but the Katyusha rockets were coming in. So we wanted to know when the war is over, what's happening, where we have to go, what's gonna happen to us. So the radio was constantly, all night, all day on.
Throughout your life and throughout the story that you tell me, it's clear that when you have a gut feeling, some of us ignore our gut feelings and some of us listen to them like they're an alarm bell. You several times in the stories you've told me, listen to your gut feeling. So before you saved your mother's life, there was a call for the kids to go on an outing. Tell us what happened.
Just like that, around, you know, in the morning, late morning, as I remember, whistles and with a loudspeaker. It was like a 4 or 5 story building. They were announcing that all the kids should come downstairs. We're gonna take them for an outing. Well, I got so scared that I had this feeling that I shouldn't go down there. My mother is working at the Rubbles, and my grandmother, I didn't even told her. I went under the mattress to hide myself. And I was scared to come out till I heard my mother and my grandmother crying that they took me away. Then I crawled out of the mattress and I said, no, I didn't go. I am here, but from now on, you go early in the morning to work and I will go to work with you. If you die, I will die. So I saved myself. I froze both of my feet because, you know, I didn't have boots. I had nice leather shoes, and I went wintertime working with my mother, dark in the morning and dark when we came home. And that's what we did till then we had to go to the ghetto.
And did you find out for sure what happened to those children?
No, nobody came back. Nobody, whomever they took, nobody came back. So obviously they ended up in Auschwitz, because most of the Hungarian Jews ended up in Auschwitz.
So you went from the different housing, and you stayed with your mom and your grandmother throughout?
And my aunt, one of my aunts.
And what are your aunts?
My father's whole family was murdered. Only one little cousin who was 4 years old at the time. He survived. I knew of him. He didn't know of me. He was little. My mother's 3/4 of her family were murdered. One of my aunts with my grandma and my mother and me, that 4 of us survived in the ghetto.
So often we sit and we hear these stories and we shake our heads and we think, oh my God, and tears catch in our throat and in the voices of our survivors. But every once in a while, they also have a story that makes us think that sometimes, even in the midst of the horror, there's beautiful stories. Peter's one of them. So your cousin, who was 4, Peter, another one of your gut instincts. So what happened to him during the war?
He was taken by one of my uncle worker and saved his life because he had the flu And when his mother went to say hello and congratulate her father, the Nazis came to this villa where they were hiding on Christian papers, and some Hungarian friends told the Nazis that they are Jews, so they were taking them to the Danube. And the daughter said, no, I'm just visiting. So they grabbed my cousin's purse, and in the purse they found the picture of my uncle, and the other side was, to my daughter with love. So she went to the Danube too. So I knew that Peter survived. But
So
then,
he hadn't taken this trip because he had the flu, right?
because he had the flu. Otherwise, he would have been with the mother. And he would have ended up in the Danube too. So if I continue, that's because I was searching for him after the war, I couldn't find him. I was very sick when we were liberated, so we go that. First we should go to the ghetto, no?
We can go wherever you want. So at that point, he was gone.
He was.
But not from your heart.
Nope, I knew he's alive.
You knew he was alive. And you went to the Carpathian Mountains?
No, after liberation.
After liberation. So you're in the ghetto at this point. You're
So
about
they
7.5?
were taking us to the ghetto. That was the final place where they took us to the ghetto. From every house they're emptied except the Swedish house because of Wallenberg. He was putting in money and holding on to the hope that he can save some Jews.
By the way, do you know at that point how much about the broader war your mom and your grandma knew what was going on?
They knew it's bad, but I was a child, so a lot of times they talked behind my back. So it was just always my gut feeling what's going on. You don't tell a 7-year-old child that we're all gonna die. And I had this tremendous feeling that I'm gonna survive, that we're gonna survive, that I love life more than anything and nobody gonna kill me. I always had that feeling.
Even at age 7 in the middle of the war?
Even at age 7, they took us to the ghetto, finally, and as we are marching, both sides of the boulevard were filled with Hungarians, laughing at us, spitting at us. Why? I realized how strong hatred is. And when I speak, I always say, get away from hatred because it boomerangs. It just bring more hatred. Why we have to hate? So I didn't know why people angry at us or just laughing at us and just hating us. So my grandmother was walking with my aunt, and they hit her with the other side of the gun because she was not going fast enough. My mother was holding my hand, and next to her was a woman, I never forget her face, holding her baby, and the baby was crying. I mean, they took us all day, like spectacles, and the baby was either wet or hungry or who knows what. Comes this Hungarian SS, grabs the baby out of her arm and throws it to the wall. That's the worst nightmare. I still have it. Every time I come and speak, I have that nightmare. I never forget that cruelty, that with the laughter. Then we got into the ghetto, and young people used to come in, and we had to put up our hand. And whoever they wanted to shoot, they shoot, just for fun. By the time it was liberation, a big pile, well, there was no bathroom. It was like a latrine, an open latrine. And I was very sick. I had double pneumonia and Russian, Ukrainian sickness, something my mother told me. I had the runs all the time. So she was holding me, and I was sitting by the latrine, this open latrine. Across from me was a pile of dead people, because we didn't have room by then. We were all living in the basement of the ghetto. And it was, the dead people were put in a pile, and it was surreal. You didn't even realize, those are all dead people. As a child, I'm telling you how I felt. So all of a sudden, they broke through the stone wall, and the Russians came in with machine guns and looking for Niemcy. Niemcy means Germans. And then they saw they saw that this is a ghetto and people are dying, and they brought in pails of chocolate for the children. And then somebody told them, don't give the children anything because we were starving. We could have died from the chocolate or from the food. So then the Russians said, you can go. We went out, and then this is also in my nightmare, the shock what I saw. As I walked out of the ghetto, dead everywhere, smoke, rubbles, death. A German soldier, a Russian soldier, a Hungarian soldier, a horse, a dog, everywhere death. And that's so instilled in my memory, I can never forget. So we went home, the home that we left, and obviously some other people were living in the house where we lived. My mother was looking for some food. There was a piece of bread in the stove, in the wood-burning stove. And I remember, a child remembers certain things. The bread was white and had green coming out of it. And we ate that bread. It was so delicious. And probably because I had double pneumonia and was no medication, and my mother took me to the doctor, and I was very sick for a few months. Probably that's what saved my life, because that thing that the mold, that's what they made penicillin from. Life saved me.
If we were doing this talk in like chapters, the last chapter, seeing a baby thrown against the wall, taken out of its mother's arms, and seeing the liberation in the image of death everywhere you go. And yet spending any time with you, it's clear that, the idea of choosing life is what you've chosen to do, that your faith and you will survive, and that life is great seems to permeate out of you. How can you go through what you went through and still have the feelings of the optimism and the belief in life that you do?
And beside that, I was very angry at God. I didn't know whom to be angry. I lost my father, my family, most of my family. I think what you asked me, because I had my mother and my grandmother and my Aunt Love. I was lucky to have their support. I don't know how somebody who didn't have the support survived. But my aunt took me to the Carpathian Mountain. After that, I felt better. Maybe they thought that the mountain air gonna be better for me. I cried all the way to the mountains because I had to leave my mother and grandmother back. I was holding on to the people that I loved. So my aunt said, it's gonna be okay. Rosh Hashanah comes, and they're gonna come, and then they're gonna take you back to Budapest. And I remember this Carpathian mountain area was beautiful, and there was never bombing there, no bombing during the war. But every Jewish home was completely destroyed by the non-Jews. Brick by brick, they took apart the houses. They were looking for gold or whatever the Jews had. They took everything away, and every home was a rubble. So I used to go, and I was very angry at God that I didn't know whom to blame. So I used to go kick a stone, and I found a little Torah one day, a little Torah scroll. It's in the Jewish Museum. And I always had the yellow star that we had to wear in my pocket. And I made a cover for this Torah and embroidered it with blue embroidery. It's in the museum, you can see it. And I said, I remember what I said. I wore this star, you wanted me to wear this star, now you can wear the star. I told God, and I still have and I didn't want to touch it. My aunt had it, and she sent it to me when I came to America. I was very angry. But as I grew up, I realized that God gives us choices. And it's not He who wanted to kill us, but the evil that is in this world. That's all I can say. I forgive God.
We talked about choice, and you said maybe we're given too many choices. Can you talk about why you said that?
Because there is so much evil in the world, and we have to stand up. You know, millions of people were murdered. Where were the other hundreds of millions of people who were bystanders, who were just stood there looking at us as we were nothing? Instead of some saved some people, not enough. Where are those people who were the bystanders and didn't stand up and didn't stop this madness? And I'm afraid that we still didn't learn.
You recently went to Baraboo. You're thinking this day and age, children, if they've learned anything from history, would know that, you know, taking a picture and mocking a Nazi salute would be the last thing in the world that you would do. And for most of us, we were just angry that they would do it. But you went to talk to them, you explained something to them they probably didn't quite figure. What did you go tell those kids?
For some reason, I survive without hatred in my heart. And when I see a young person, I don't feel hatred, even with that salute. I thought it was stupid. These kids did something stupid. Maybe the parents are at fault, or maybe somebody told them. But I told them, you know, I lived under fascism, and it was terrible. Then I lived under communism, and it was terrible. And then I went back to Budapest on family visit with my 1-year-old daughter and husband, and we lived through the Hungarian Revolution. I lived through the Hungarian Revolution. It was total destruction again, total hatred and destruction from the Russians, from the communists. So I tell the kids, I lived through fascism, I lived through communism. This is a wonderful, wonderful country, wonderful democracy, freedom. Be good to each other. You don't have to hate one another. Love one another. Don't bully, because that brings bad things. I said, I'm not going to scold you. I'm going to tell you that when I came to Milwaukee, I used to take my children to Baraboo. That was the most pleasant place on earth. Beautiful. Look what beauty you have here. We used to camp there. We used to enjoy here. I still want to remember it that way. I don't want to remember it that way. Every child in 650 kids, they came and hugged me. Because that's the truth, the positive truth, that you have choices.
So as you said, you survived fascism and communism and the revolution. How did you and your family come here?
So we escaped during the Hungarian Revolution with the baby in my arm. When we came out of the revolution into Austria, we had to sign up for immigration. You know, we were refugees. So we got from the small town of Austria to Vienna. And that was the beginning, this story, what I'm gonna tell you, that was the beginning that my soul kind of started to restore itself. From the picture that is in my mind, how the Nazi took the baby, threw it to the wall, I was standing in front of the American embassy, and my baby was in my arm, crying. And I didn't speak German. This was Austria, this was Vienna. It was very bad during the World War II. Vienna was just as bad as Germany, even more. As my baby Judy was crying, this woman, I didn't know, comes over and sees me with the baby in my arm and starts doing this by hand. Come. So I said to my husband, I'm gonna go. I don't know what she wants. Stood out of the line and followed her. A block away, she took me into her home. She took off the sheet from her bed and cut it up and gave me diapers. So I said, you know, there are still good people in this world. And it's kind of begin the restoration that probably that was my way of connecting back to humanity. And then we worked for the visa to come, and we got a working permit, and we came on a boat, General Han. We went to the boat 25th of December. That night, my daughter came out with chicken pox all the way to America. And we arrived January 7th to America. When I saw that Statue of Liberty, I said, I'm home. The home for a freedom of no wars, of goodness. And I love this country very much.
And you came here to New Jersey first? How'd you get to Milwaukee?
First to New Jersey, and my sister-in-law and brother-in-law lived here in Milwaukee, and they came in about August to see how we live, and they said, you know, you live in such a crowded place, Patterson, New Jersey, and why don't we just go to Milwaukee? It's so beautiful. The air is clean, and it's a clean environment. You're gonna like it much better. Our friend Tony Alter was living there too. We decided, we came to Milwaukee. So, and I love Milwaukee.
So you come back to Milwaukee, and you have one daughter.
And then I had another daughter.
So Judy and Lisa.
And what I didn't tell you, in the Carpathian Mountain, while we were living there, we could not leave because the Russians, it became Russia. So when my mother and grandmother came to take me back to Budapest, they closed the borders. The Russians closed the borders. Nobody could leave because they put all the armament, guns, and then later the nuclear weapons, all in the Ukraine, all this mountain area. So they didn't let us go out. So till I was married at age 17, I had Judy when I was 18, and we went to the embassy, and we got a visa to go to family visitation to Budapest. And that's how I took one picture. This is me and my daughter Judy, a passport picture to go to Hungary and then to come to the United States. So during this time when I was living in the Carpathian Mountain, we had to learn how to have bread and vegetable. We had to plant our own to eat, because it wasn't like Budapest where you go to the supermarket. This was a country where you had to make your own. My mother remarried, and I had the joy of my life. My little sister was born, so I finally had a sibling, which I loved very much. I had to leave people behind again. My whole life, that's why I have so many pictures in the walls, in the refrigerator, in every room of my house, because those are my memories. I carried the picture along. And when I came to this country and later on, I was searching for my cousin all the time. My father's little, nephew. Finally, year 2000, my husband found him in Australia, and Sydney, Australia. And since then, we see each other at least once a year. Either I go there or they come here. So that's my story.
That's a great story. I have a couple questions for you.
Okay.
Someone would like you to tell us what you remember of your Jewish family life before the war. Did you go to synagogue?
My grandmother, from my mother's side, they were very religious. My grandma, I remember during the Holocaust, my aunt found some bacon and brought it over, and my grandmother said, rather than I should eat this, I should die. There was no way that she's gonna have even a taste of it. From my father's side, I am 5th-generation Hungarian. I have papers. There were more, and I'm going back. We belonged to a small synagogue, Orthodox synagogue in the neighborhood. That's where we went. But my father belonged to the Dohány utca synagogue because the whole family belonged there, his family. My uncle was the president of the big synagogue in Budapest. That's where my parents got married. We went to that synagogue, and the rabbi at that time found my uncle's name on one of the cover. Yes, we lived Jewishly.
Is there, you mentioned a little bit about the recovery process with your daughter in your arms and the kindness of the stranger, but the question of how did you heal, or if you actually became healed from the exposure to the horror and the trauma. Can you heal and never forget at the same time?
I never forget. I always searching for all my family. Every time there is a Holocaust movie or a book, I'm looking for my father. Maybe he didn't die. Maybe somebody looks familiar. Maybe that's somebody that maybe wasn't killed. It's always with me. But I healed. Maybe that was just my personality. And I do love life. And I do love my family more than anything. And I love my children and grandchildren. And I think in the process, I made a deal with God. I feel I made a deal with God because a lot of people lost faith, and I didn't. I held on to it.
How do you respond to the deniers, the movement of people who say it just never happened and it's all fabricated?
Again, it's that anger of lies, of destruction. It's constantly lifting its head up. And I get more mad at the people who don't stand up and say something than the people who do the stupid things.
You mentioned that the experience of seeing the baby torn from its mother's arms is the worst nightmare. Do you still have nightmares? I mean, is this
Yes.
something that goes away
Every
at all?
time I speak. Last night, too, I was telling my son-in-law, I didn't have such a good night. I have a stress. I relive parts of my past is like shooting up into my head. It's very difficult to. I get like anxious and I have to do it because I feel maybe in a small way I do something good. I bring something good so people can see that choose the good in life. And that's why I do it, otherwise I wouldn't. Because it opens my wounds all the time.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Kathleen Gloff, and I am pastor at Summers United Church of Christ. The piece I am going to read was written by Primo Levi, a Holocaust survivor and author. Primo Levi died by suicide when he was in his early 80s. Although he had survived the war by several decades, he could no longer withstand the guilt of being a Holocaust survivor. Primo Levi Shema. You who live secure in your comfortable houses, who return each evening to find warm food, welcoming faces. Consider whether this is a man who toils in the mud, who knows no peace, who fights for crusts of bread, who dies at another man's whim, at his yes or his no. Consider whether this is a woman, bereft of hair, of a recognizable name, because she lacks the strength to remember. Her eyes as void and her womb as frigid as a frog's in winter. Consider that such horrors have been. I commend these words to you. Engrave them in your hearts when you lounge in your house, when you walk outside, when you go to bed, when you rise. Repeat them to your children, or may your house crumble and disease render you helpless, so that even your offspring avert their faces from you.